Hey, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. Thanks for joining us today. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Nick Edwards. A little bit more about myself in a moment, but I'm a junior software engineer. I enjoy volunteering and learning with others, collaborating with others, sharing knowledge. And so, as Stephanie alluded to, I often do events for Codecademy, and I focus on like really micro concepts of various technical skills. We've been focused a lot on Git lately. That's a skill that a lot of, every developer really needs to have within their toolkit. But I think it's one, that might not get, it's not as fancy or doesn't get as much attention, but it is a fundamental skill that every developer really should have. It's one that I've focused a lot on as a junior software engineer. And so, I've developed a three-part series. Today's part one of that series. Where I'm going to be hopefully helping you, the viewers, if you guys stick with me throughout the three-part series, learning Git, what is Git, talking a little bit about GitHub, a lot of things that kind of, are involved along that process, especially when you're working within like a shared collaborative environment. So really by the end of the series, my hope for you is that you'll understand a lot more about what Git is, what GitHub is, how to use the tools effectively, how to feel confident working with others as well. Peer programming is a great way to learn. And meet new individuals within the community. So, hopefully this session will empower you guys. So welcome. I come from Boston, USA. I'm actually calling in from Vermont. Um, so before we get started, a few reminders real quick. So one thing I always like to call out is to be brave, be vulnerable. It can be really if you have anxiety, or if you struggle with learning new things or struggle with learning new people, given whatever past experience you might have, it might be difficult to throw yourself out there, ask questions, but at the end of the day, you should really be able to ask those questions. I want you to feel comfortable asking those questions. So please use the chat to, as best as you can, but be brave, be vulnerable, ask those questions, get engaged. That's the third bullet point there. You guys are engaged just by showing up. But be mindful and respectful of others as well. That's very important. And of course, we're going to try to have fun as well. We are going to do a little bit of demo today. So, anytime we do a demo, if anybody's been a part of a technical demo before, there's this thing called the demo gods. Hopefully they smile upon us and we won't run into any issues. So today's agenda, again, we're going to do an overview of Git and GitHub. What are they? Why do we use them? We're going to do a review of some common terms just to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language right from the beginning. We'll look into a little bit into getting started with Git, how to set it up on your machine if you don't have it set up already. We'll talk a little bit about the configuration details. Um, Ultimately, we are going to be using VS Code throughout the series. VS Code has a lot of core built-in functionality. Integrating with GitHub is one of them. So anytime you try to push, to a remote origin, if you don't know where remote origin is, we'll go over that in the second session of this series. But anytime you do those kinds of things, it should try to authenticate you with GitHub via the web interface. So, and that's kind of the recommended path forward. So we're not going to talk too much about the configuration components, but there are a few things I want to touch on that I think are good to know. We'll talk a little bit about the basic Git workflow as well. So we'll look at the working and staging area. We'll talk a little bit about what those are, the difference between the two, why they're important. We'll talk about commits, what commits are, why those are important, and especially we'll talk about viewing the commit history. The commit history is something that we're going to be engaged with and interacting with a lot throughout the series. It's a core concept of Git. It's the timeline of all the different commits and changes that have been made to your code base. And then if we have time, we'll look at a little bit into integrating with GitHub. So just a little bit more about me. Of course, my name's Nick. I'm from Vermont. I'm a husband. I'm a father to two furballs. There's a picture of me and my wife at PAX East in Boston last year. Beans, Milo, my kitties. I enjoy gaming, coding, Dungeons and Dragons. That's D&D. Playing guitar, and I love the outdoors. I'm very passionate about volunteering, learning, growing the mind, and helping and collaborating with others. And I'm a junior software engineer. I've been a software engineer officially now for several months, but I've been doing the role for a little less than a year. I joined Codecademy back in 2020 when I got a role as a cloud cost analyst. So I was working a lot with cloud services like AWS and cost management, reserved instances, FinOps, if you've heard of that domain before. And so I became a member of Codecademy. Many, many years ago, I actually finished Python 3. That was my first course on the platform. But I included this slide because I think it's good to mention, like you've once stumbled on one of these screens with the hopes of learning to code. I want you to know that even though like several years down the line, I'm still learning to code. I think I'll always be learning how to code, and I think everybody is and will be. The technical landscape is changing just so rapidly. The more that we move forward, especially with AI hitting the scene, there's new solutions, new products, and new languages, and there's a lot of things to learn. There's a lot of things to specialize in. So, learning is a continuous thing within this industry. So I think it's just good to call it out. It's something that, people that I look up to have called out for me. And I think it's just something important to pass down. Just it's important to stay consistent, show up, and just give it your best. All right, so let's get into the content. What are Git and GitHub? Um, Git is a distributed version control system. So what exactly does that mean? We're going to break it down into those different terms. Distributed means everybody has like a full functioning copy of the project. If you're working with GitHub, especially, there's a remote copy of that project, which is an even safer method. But every time you have a Git repository or you make a copy of that Git repository or that project, if you don't know what a repository is, don't worry. We'll talk about here in a second, but it's distributed. There's lots of copies of it. Every copy is I wouldn't say the same, but it starts from the same when you copy it, as in all the commit history, all the commits that have been made, all the code that's been committed to that project, all of that's the same fundamentally. So when you share that project, you're distributing it, and there's some benefit to doing so. Version control. Version controls, what that really means is it just tracks changes to files over time. All files within your code base, as commits are made to them, as changes are made to them, those are going to get tracked. Who made those changes, when they made those changes, what time they made those changes. It's great for like regulatory compliance or audit controls, not just for like governments or whatnot, government regulations, but it's good to have a oversight of your system. You should care about that and be informed about that as a developer as well. Um, and system, really that's just something that helps manage complex information and transactions. So you can imagine as a code base grows, as the number of developers that commit to that code base grow, there's a lot of information and transactions going back and forth that, you're going to have to pay attention to and monitor and track and, get as a system that we use in order to track all those changes made to a code base over time. Some good analogies to make here is that you can think of it as like saving versions of your video game progress. Using a time machine to view alternate timelines, or think of it like a recipe to make your delicious meal or treat. You start from one point, and then as you make progress throughout the process, there's different checkpoints. Another analogy might be, walking into the woods and leaving a flag or some kind of, tape or something behind you just to track your progress to make sure you don't get lost. So, at the end of the day, why does Git matter within the landscape? Again, it's just the distributive nature of Git and tracking changes made over time. It helps prevent the loss of code and data within that code base. Of course, we're tracking all the changes made to the code base. So, if a bug was introduced or a feature went in that wasn't working quite as well, we can look at the commit history or look at the pull request history of a code base, and we can understand a little bit more about the changes that were made to it over time. And that allows us, it helps us troubleshoot if we ever need to, but it's important to have that. It does allow us to maintain different versions within isolated environments. Isolated environments, it's kind of those are called branches. We're probably not going to talk too much about those this session. Branching is going to be a big focus of the next session, but at the end of the day, Git does help us isolate different environments of the same code base. So you can think of if you had a production code base for some reason that had a bug in it and you needed to do a hot fix on it, you could check out that branch, so to say, that environment, make some changes to it without impacting the code base within a separate repository. But then you're able to merge those changes back in a safe and secure manner. There's a lot of things that you can do throughout that process as well, especially when you incorporate GitHub. using GitHub Actions. You can run some validations for test cases. You can kick off deployment pipelines. There's a lot of different things that you can do, especially when you're working with different environments and branches. It does allow you to collaborate with others, typically without overwriting each other's work. You do have to be careful with your commit history at times, especially if you're doing reverts or resetting in shared environments. I won't say that it's impossible it's not impossible to overwrite each other's work, because it is possible. You do need to be concerned about that. But the tools that Git and GitHub give us, it makes it really easy not to, typically. And it allows for easy rollback of reverting changes when necessary, right? So if you produced a new bug, you put a change into production that caused the server to crash, some 500 errors, you're not handling an exception. There's could be some logical bugs, and the system's just not working as it intends to, and the end user notices that. You can go back in and you can revert those changes when necessary. So there's a lot of benefit to using Git. Some terms, just so we can kind of level set here. When I say a repository, you can think of a repository as basically a folder for a code base. There are two types, which we're going to talk a lot more about in the second session of this series. But the two types are it's a local repository or a remote repository. And you might hear me refer to this as a repo as well. That's a short term for them, or shorthand, term for them. Anywho, branches. Please return for session 2 for more on branches. But again, branches are isolated environments where we can safely experiment with new code features, fixes, etc. Commits, those are saved sets of changes with a unique identifier representing them. So if you make a change to one file, if you make a change to several files, doesn't matter. When you add those to your staging area, which is the next one here, when you add those to your staging area, you're basically saying, here's all the changes that I want to be associated to a specific commit. When I create this commit, all those changes are going to be associated to that. The identifier represents them. There's metadata about that. It's a unique way to save a set of changes within a code base. That's what a commit is. The working area and the staging area are things that you can think about when you're making changes within a particular branch or whatnot within a code base. There's changes that you're making locally that you aren't ready to commit yet. You don't want to commit them to history. You might just be experimenting with a few things, but there might be some changes about what you're working with. Maybe you add some logs, or you added some boilerplate code for a new class, or a new connection to a database or something, right? If you want to save that code and that change individually, what you would do is you would take those changes from what's known as your working area, move them up to your staging area. And when that code is within your staging area, that allows you to create that commit and kind of, wrap those changes around a particular commit with a unique identifier that represents them. And it's a good way to keep a clean history of changes that you make to a code base throughout time. So moving on to GitHub. So we've reviewed a little bit about what Git is. GitHub is not the same as Git. GitHub is a cloud-based platform that hosts Git repositories, and it adds a powerful visual interface for managing code. Provides tools for tracking changes, collaborating with others, and organizing your project's development over time. And with a GitHub account, developers can upload their code, share with others, and contribute to projects from anywhere. Some analogies for GitHub that you can think about is you can kind of visualize it as a social networking site for developers. Kind of think of it for LinkedIn for devs, if you will. You can think of it kind of similar to maybe a postal office, right? So wherever you're located, wherever you're located in the world, when you create a commit and you push that to a remote repository, which is what will exist on GitHub. Again, more of that in the second session, but you're sending data from your machine to GitHub servers, so that they can keep and maintain those remote copies of that repository. GitHub itself, it might serve as another intermediary, and the fact that their GitHub Actions can actually send out a lot of different requests to other systems, maybe other cloud services like AWS or whatnot, to kick off various pipeline deployments, quality checks. There's some new AI tools that are kind of hitting the scene too that do some quality checks to make sure that, let's say all the variables that you put in your code that you're introducing into the code base, let's make sure those are used. If you've got functions that don't have documentation for them, they're configurable settings, but at the end of the day, they're tools that teams can use to make their code base, a little cleaner and secure some of that quality throughout time. Instead of waiting until late in the deployment pipeline when you're getting ready to go to production and then kind of worrying about that stuff then and there. Um, so that's what GitHub is. Again, it's a cloud-based platform that helps us host those Git repositories. And it provides a lot of visual tools like, pull requests. That's one of them. Pull requests is something that GitHub and others, it's not just something that's local to GitHub, but a pull request is something that GitHub helps kind of facilitate with some of their user interface. There's a lot of different features to GitHub. It's a pretty neat tool. The key takeaway, though, that I want you guys to know is that Git is a tool that runs on your computer that tracks changes to your code over time, like saving versions of your work as you go. Whereas, again, GitHub is that cloud-based repository hosting service that stores those versions online and gives you tools to collaborate with others, review those changes, and manage your projects visually. I'm going to pause for questions here before we continue. Does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat. So I'll give it about 10, 15 seconds or so. I'm not sure if I can see the status of people typing or whatnot. Patricia says all clear. Thank you. Is the content making sense so far? Is it insightful, helpful? I'm also happy to hear that feedback too. All right. Oh, see, one question. Can GitHub and GitLab accounts be connected? I would assume so. I'm not sure if GitLab is a product of GitHub or if it's entirely separate. I haven't used GitLab. I don't have a lot of experience with that one. Um, but potentially, and maybe somebody that might be listening, if you know the answer to that, please go ahead and put that in the chat too. All right, so let's move on with setting up Git. Um, Again, I am a junior software engineer. I think it's good to call that out. I don't want to give you guys any information that I think is false, don't know to be true. I am not. The reason I mention that is because I am not an expert on all the different operating systems and the package managers. I've dipped my feet into a few different areas, of course, but I definitely employed the help of ChatGPT here as well. So thank you to them. So to download Git, if you don't have Git installed already, for Windows, you can download the installer. You can also do this for Mac OS, but if you have Homebrew, which I think comes pre-installed for some Mac OS systems, depending on the year, you can use the brew install Git command. For Linux, depending on the distribution that you might be using, you can use one of those commands to install Git. But this link here, whoops, let's go back. Copy link address. I'm going to put this link in the chat so you guys can quickly access that. Once you go there, though, it should bring you right to the downloads page. If you're on Windows, download the installer. Use the default setup options. If you get asked to add anything to your path variable, please do so. Use the default path settings as far as like where the file is going to be installed, unless you want it somewhere else and you know what you're doing with that. But the default installation option should just be fine for our use case. And I'm going to pause just a little bit because I want everyone to get an opportunity to install that if you don't have it installed already. If you run into any installation problems, it might be because I'm not sure, the machine that you're calling in from, if it's a personal device to you, if it's a device that was given to you from a company, potentially, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's going to be any security issues there or whatnot, but um, oh, why am I sending it looks like I sent a direct message to somebody actually. Meeting group chat. I am not familiar with Zoom, so how about that? Can everybody see that link? Thanks for the feedback too. I see the thumbs up. Awesome. Appreciate it. And so if I click on that, I'll actually just open up that page too. So this is the download screen. Of course, you got Mac OS, Linux, Windows. I'm on Windows, so if I needed to install it, I'd go into here. Oh, no, that's not what I want. Install a 64-bit Git for Windows setup. If you're on 32-bit, go ahead and install that one. Um, and then go through I think you can use Wingit as well to install it locally using the CLI. There's an option for selecting the default text editor for Git. You mentioned just using VS Code. It's not the default selection. Vim is. I would, yeah, but I'm sure that's a question depending on who you ask. Vim versus VS Code. I'm sure there's a few people that are probably real passionate about one or the other. I do find VS Code to be a very versatile tool. It's got a lot of extensions that help you develop and contribute to projects of various technical stacks. So it's just something that I've grown to be comfortable with. So that's what I would recommend. But I'm sure others might have different opinions. It's not the same program as Git Bash. VS Code does have a Git Bash terminal, and that's what I'm actually going to be using for the demo. But Git Bash, I believe, also is its own. If you're on Windows, it's going to be its own application on your system. I've seen the answer, James. Thank you. James says GitLab and GitHub can be integrated for CI/CD using tokens as opposed to OAuth, although some integrations required paid accounts. Okay. So what he means by that is when, for CI/CD using tokens, kind of earlier when we were talking about pull requests and merging code from one branch to another, there are some, like GitHub Actions, for example, there are some automated jobs. There's lots of different things that you can kick off to kind of either inspect your code before you go ahead and merge it. You can kick off other pipelines that do various different things. I'm installing it, but it asked me for the default editor. Should I use Vim or VS Code? So I would go with VS Code. That's my personal recommendation. It seems like chat's agreeing as well. But VS Code is going to be really useful to use as well later on when we go to push code to GitHub because there's just some natural built-in functionalities. Okay. All right. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to download Git. So Git Bash is going to be kind of like the terminal, the CLI that you're going to be using to write Git commands. So Git Bash is just something that you'll write the Git commands into, like Git status, Git commit, Git add. You're writing those into something called Git Bash. To validate slash verify your installation, run the command git dash dash version. If you run that and you have Git installed successfully, you should get a response that looks a little bit like this one. Let's pull up my example for now. So Git version. I have got my caps on. Let me take those off. You can see I have Git version 2.42.0. All right, so now that we have Git installed, and again, if you're having difficulty with installation options, apologies. Those are the demo gods for you. This is being recorded, so please, come back to the recording. Once you get through some of those challenges, if you're a part of the Codecademy community, you're welcome to message me as well. I'm happy to help out any way that I can as time permits. Um, well, but I'll move on for the sake of the demo. For those of you that were able to get installed. So a couple of things I want to call out first as far as configuring Git. Again, VS Code, which we're going to be using, has some built-in functionalities that allow us to authenticate those calls that we need in order to pull and push information to and from GitHub. But a few things that I think are important to mention are some of the like the environment, like not environment, that's not the right word to use, but configuration variables for Git. The two that I really want to call out are these first two, your username and your user email. Anytime you commit to a project or a repository from your machine, if you're working with any repository, it does not matter where it is on your machine. If you don't have, and I'm going to skip to the bottom of here, if you don't have a local configuration file defined, your global settings are always going to be used. And typically that's fine. That's what's expected. But if for whatever reason, if you're ever working on a particular project where you wanted to keep your email private for some reason, you could do so by changing these variables here. But I just feel like it's important to call them out. If you ever need to set them, especially for new users, you're expected to set these variables before you can contribute. The command's going to be git config dash dash global user dot name, and then provide your name here. Same thing for email. If you want to see if you have anything there, I'm not demoing this because I don't want to show that data on the live recording. But if you ever need to see this information to see if you have it set locally, what you can do is you can also use the command git config dash dash list. That'll show every variable that you have set there. But if you want to see a particular variable set within your config, you can use the command git config user.name or whatever other variable you might want to use. But user.name is just an example. But again, if you're working with a repository or machine, by default, your global settings are going to be used unless you set local settings. You cannot use this command. If you're trying to use this and type this already, it's probably going to give you an error. You need to have a Git repository initialized in order to use a local Git configuration file. All right, so let's dive into basic Git workflow. How are we doing on time? We're about halfway through the session. Great. Okay. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth between this presentation and VS Code. Again, like I said at the beginning of the session, or at least if I didn't mention it, I should mention it now. I am very focused on building content that is it's focused on like micro learning. I think incremental learning is a great way to approach any new thing. If you try to learn a ton all at once, it can be very overwhelming, and that can lead to you feeling confused. And if you're feeling confused or discouraged, you might not show up tomorrow or the day after that. It might be a few days before you show up again, if you show up again. I'm sure everybody here, if you're wherever you are within your learning journey, you've had extreme focus for weeks, maybe a week on end, days on end, months on end, but quite the same. You've probably had moments where you've been disengaged for just as long. And that can be really damaging to learning. So I find it easier to just introduce little concepts over time. So a basic Git workflow, we're not going to be talking about moving code between different branches. All we're going to do is we're just going to talk about just a really fundamental concept of Git. We're going to create a repository. We're going to talk about that working in staging area a little bit. We're going to see it in action. We're going to create one file, just a simple README, right? A README file is something that every repository, every project usually has and starts with. It's something that helps other people understand more about the project and the code that you have on your portfolio, or whatever project you're working on. It might be for a team project. There might be some details in there that help someone understand how to set up that repository or set up that project locally to do some testing, right? A README file is very common. So we're going to create one of those. We're just going to add some just random text just here and there, different headings and things like that. The point is that we're making changes to the file. We're going to make several changes, and we're going to commit several. We're going to commit several changes, and then we're going to actually view that commit history. And so by the end of the demo there, what you guys should understand is what a repository is, how to create one, how to create a file, make some changes to it, how to build those commits, and how to view that history. Pausing for some questions here real quick because I see some here in the chat. Thank you for those that are answering already as well. And I'll just back you guys up further. Yes, you can start a repo in a directory with existing files. I probably should have said, within an empty or any directory. I'm starting from an empty one personally, but as long as you don't have a repository already created, you can go into a directory that already has code and create a repository. But it's going to track all the files that you have in there, of course, as new files. So that initial commit that you create could be pretty large, depending on how big your repository is. All right, so let's move over to VS Code. This first thing that we're going to use is we're going to use Git and Git. That's what we need to do to create a repository. So one thing I'm going to do real quick before I do this is I'm going to make a test directory for this. So make there, let's just say Git dash playground. Let's just do that. Okay, and then I'm going to go into that directory. I'm going to pull up my window here just a little bit. Hopefully everybody can see that. You let me know in the chat if it's too small. So now that I'm in this just this directory, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one command. I'm going to use ls-a. Dash a is going to show me everything within this directory, even if it's hidden. And you can quickly see right here that I've just got a few root, I've got a few root directories here. I've got the current one, I've got the parent one, but I don't have any Git files in here just yet. This is my first time on VS Code. How do you pull up the directory? Make dir equals make directory, change directory. Thank you for that. But a great question on the terminal. If you're in VS Code and this is your first time using VS Code, you can go up here to terminal and you can just click new terminal. When it opens up this interface, make sure that over here in the dropdown, it might open up by default in PowerShell or something else, depending on what operating system you're on. But there should be a dropdown for Git Bash. And that's what will bring you here as well. Unless you're on Mac. If you're on Mac already, you probably will be fine. So we don't have a repository yet, right? We don't have any files in here. If I use that command, git, and it stands for initialize. This is initialized empty git repository, and then that file directory there, right? Now, if I use that same command, ls-a, you can now see that we've got this .git dash folder here. This is the Git repository. This is all the metadata that's associated with the repository. Can I use Git Bash or mass use terminal inside VS Code? You can use either one. I'm just using VS Code for the sake of the demo, but Git Bash, everything that I'm doing here should work in Git Bash just fine as well. So now you can see that we've got this this .git folder here. That's the repository, right? Okay. So we've got the GitHub, not Git. We've got the Git repository initialized. Next thing that we need to do is we need to create a file. You can use the touch command to create a file, or you can just manually do it within your file explorer, within VS Code as well. You can right click and just click new file. But I'll use touch readme.md. Okay. You can see now that I've got a readme.md here. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. We don't have any stuff in it right now, right? So switching back to the presentation, the next thing that we're going to do after we have a file here is we're going to explore what this next command does, git status. Git status is a command that we're going to use that helps us visualize the difference between our working area and our staging area. And that's going to be really important throughout everything that you do with Git, because you're always going to want to know, especially what's in your staging area when you go to create commit. I promise you, I've done it. Many others have done it. I will probably do it at some point in time again in my career. But there are times where you might have a file in there that you didn't want to go as part of a commit. You may have clicked the wrong one if you're using some of the VS Code UI or whatnot. So I just call it out. It's important to know what's in your staging area versus your working area, especially when you're creating commits. You want to make sure that you're working with the most intent there as possible. So going back to VS Code though, if I do git status right now, you can see that we have this new file readme, but you can see that currently one is not only the highlighted red, it's untracked as well. It's an untracked file. So using git add, actually kind of, one thing about Git that's actually really useful is it gives us some helpful tips, especially when we have errors or, not sure what to do next. In order to get this into our staging area, we need to use the command git add, and then the file that we want to add. You can add one file, you can add many files, you could just need to space them. If you have multiple files and a lot of changes across all the files, and you want to add every single one of those changes and you don't want to go through adding the individual files, you can use this command git add and then use a period. The period just represents, everything within my working area. Don't matter where it is, please add it to the staging area. That's helpful to use if you want to. But if you're trying to be cautious about, what specific commits are going with which, you might want to use the second option. This might be a safer path. After you make changes to a file, what you can do is I can right now is I can add this file without any content in it at all. And the way that I would do that is I would go git add readme. And you can see that I typed RE, then it just auto-completed. I'm just pressing tab there. if you're not aware of that little shortcut. If there was another file also called README, I mean, you couldn't have the same file name, but if it had like a similar like prefix or something, like README.2, sometimes you need to be a little bit more specific in that use case. But generally, if it's one file and it's going to be a string match or an exact match on that file, just press tab and it'll autocomplete for you. So now that I've added it, I'm going to do git status one more time. And if you're not sure how I'm doing this and toggling between different commands, we're just using the up and down arrow key. So I'm going to do git status one more time. And this time what you're going to see is you're going to see changes to be committed. We're going to have a new file here. It's a README. We're not going to talk today about removing things from the stage. Join next session. Next session, we're going to be jumping more into branching and talking about moving code between different branches. And a part of that is going to be looking at how we can move code to the staging area as well as remove it. But we're not going to be jumping into that today. But what I want to, the important call out here is that we don't have any commits yet. However, using the add command, we've added this file, and you can see visually now that it's showing as such that's ready to be committed. So in order to move forward with that commit, we're going to use this command right here, git commit -m, and then within quotes, we're going to provide some kind of message. If you're getting the touch is not recognized as the name of the commandlet or function or script file error, what that probably means is I'm going to guess if you might be on Windows and if you're in a PowerShell environment, touch is not part of PowerShell. So if you just toggle, if you go over to VS Code and you just toggle in this drop down up here, put plus, or the drop down next to plus, you can choose Git Bash instead of PowerShell. And that might be what's going on. Okay. All right, so now that we've got this new file, we went through and we've reviewed that commit command. Let's go ahead and create a commit. So I'm going to use git commit -m, and then in this message, I'm going to say initial commit add readme. And I'm not applying best practices or anything like that right now. Again, I am focused on micro learning concepts. We'll build up to best practices and kind of like some commonalities across the industry. I would definitely seek, feedback from tons of people there. I'm just one person out of, many people within this community, I'm sure, but I would say best practices, some people might have some various differing opinions, but I think it's important to read them all and reflect on them all and make informed decisions for yourself. But that's not going to be the focus of this conversation today. Right now, we're just focused on, just core fundamentals. But stay tuned for more on the other. And I mention that only because sometimes I get some questions when I go through this. If you get a huge list when doing a git status, I'm guessing it's probably because you created a repository in a directory that has a lot of files in it already or other subdirectories, and you're probably just seeing a lot of information there. That might be why. All right, so now that I've made the commit, the last step of this basic Git workflow that we're going to review is seeing that history. And the way that we view that Git log history is, just what I just said, Git log. There's also Git log, and then you can use -- flags. Don't use this per se. Whoops. But there's other ones, and I'll show you here in a few just in a moment. But like there's ones that are like one line, all, decorate. There's a few different flags that you can use that modify the behavior of Git log, and it can be useful depending on what you're looking for. But let's just say if I wanted to view that history just normally, let's see what Git log does. I'm going to actually clear the screen just so we can really see what's going on here. If I do Git log. All right, so what you can see here is we've got the author of the commit, we've got the date of the commit, we've got this initial commit here, the messages, and then we've got this commit hash right here as well. If I wanted to, so now actually I want to retrack a little bit because when I show the commit history, you can usually see the author details as well. Let's say you wanted to hide some of those details. What you could do is you could do git config. I haven't done this in a very long time. I want to say it's user. I'll refer to my own notes if I need to. But let's just say test@email.com. I'm just going to go back a few things here. And this is a good example, guys, right? I mean, right here. So I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to do dash dash global. That's probably a default option as well. But I think it's an important call out here that I'm just reviewing even some of the own notes that I had. This is something you're going to have to do pretty frequently within the space. Um, you're always going to have to refer to documentation, do some more research, unless you're doing something every single day and committing that stuff to like, true memory. Um, you know, everybody's always trying to, read up on documentation or just try to answer the questions that way, kind of like as on an as needed basis. Don't feel like you need to know everything off the top of your head immediately. Exactly. That's a good way to put it, Taylor. We only have so much RAM to work with in our heads. Okay. So I've set that email. I'm actually kind of curious here. So I'm going to make a change here. Let's do a couple more commits. I don't want Copilot's help right now, but thank you. I'm going to say welcome to my project as just a level 1 header. I'm going to save that. Let's see what Git status has for us. All right, so it says that we've modified the README. That's important. It's picking up on that. If I want to commit this change now, right, what I want to do is I want to do git add README. I'm going to do that tab again. Let's just check status one more time, make sure it's agreeing with us. Great, it's picking up that it's modified and it's ready to be committed. So I'm going to do git commit -m. Let's say add heading 1 to README. Let's just be super basic here. Okay. So I'm going to clear the screen that I have a commit there, and let's do a git log. Great. So when I made this commit, you can see that my email's there. Please don't send me a bunch of stuff. I should have done this prior, but in the effort of education and whatnot, it is what it is. But you can see that in live time, I was able to change that test email. This is something that you could do, but I just want to demo that. Okay, so now that we've kind of done an overview of what Git is, right? We've talked a little bit about Git. We've talked about GitHub. That's the content that we wanted to review today. I want you guys to join for the next session, session 2, session 3. I actually have a couple of different slides there. We've got about 15 minutes left, which I wanted to save for questions. The next session is going to be Wednesday, May 14th at 3 p.m. We're going to talk about integrating with GitHub. We're going to talk about cloning, forking, creating remote repositories. Again, remote repositories, those are repositories that exist on GitHub. We're going to talk a little bit more about those and how when we pull those locally, it's going to be more of like um, a local repository. And we'll talk the difference between those. Exploring branching, moving commits, merging commits between branches. We're going to do an overview of pull requests and collaboration things there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about resolving merge conflicts as well. The second session here, I think Stephanie put some links to the next sessions further up in the chat, but just in case those got lost, I'm going to go ahead and put the next session there. That's still going to be session 2. Session 3, which is the final session, that's going to be on May 28th at 3 p.m. We're going to have a discussion on commits and commit history. Commit history is a big thing when using commit, especially when you're merging code between different branches. That's going to be a big thing as you become a developer. You're going to have to check out different branches to do your own work within and then merge that code back to a shared environment. How you move forward with merging that code. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing that. So in that final session, we're going to really focus on the different ways of doing so. We're going to talk more about merging. We're going to dive into rebasing. We're going to talk about squashing and cherry picking as well. And we're going to talk about working with stashes. Stashes is something that you can use to kind of maintain your project, your branch rather. Maybe pull in new changes. Maybe there was a change from a shared branch that you need to pull in locally without impacting some changes you might have there already. You can put those in what's kind of known as a stash and then reapply that code back after pulling in some changes. So there's a lot of like little different, niche tricks and skills that are good to have, especially when you're working with Git and GitHub and collaborating with others on projects. So that's going to wrap up the content here today. I'm going to jump to the chat here and look at the questions. Good thing your email isn't getting passed. Unfortunately, it is. But that's my mistake. Hopefully everybody's kind. May 14th, 3 p.m. So all the times there are going to be Eastern. I actually probably should have written that down. So like, New York City, Boston time frame, Eastern, East Coast time frame. They're all next sessions are going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern. I want to see the last commands. Which commands particular? Are commit messages permanent? Yes, commit messages. Well, no, not technically. Um, they are. However, there are ways, especially when modifying commit history, there are ways to be destructive and remove commits. We are going to look into that. We are going to experiment with that in the next session. Um, so I want to say that they're permanent, but typically, yes, many of them tend to be, especially as the project grows. As a Git project grows, you really start to get a lengthy, code timeline, right? If you think of it like a timeline, each commit that you add, it just the list grows and grows. And then when you start to merge from one branch to another and you start managing different timelines and merging those back together, at some point you start to kind of get to a point where, branches are going to have they have a common core history. If you try to do anything with that, you're going to run into problems. We're not going to go that deep into it. But yeah, after changing the README file on VS Code. So after you change the file, we go back over to VS Code here. After you change the file, what you can do is you can use git status. So let's just say, well, if I did git status right here, I don't have any changes here, but if I wanted to do a change, let's just say I wanted to do a level 2 that says introduction. I can't type. And then just say, sure, let's take Copilot's suggestion there. If I do a status, so this is again, the status is what allows you to see the difference between your working area and your staging area. If you wanted to add this, you could do git add, and then you could do all, which adds all files, or you can do a specific file. We didn't demo the all, so I'm just going to do that real quick just to show it. Because if I do git status here, you'll see that it still added it, even though we use a different command here. So it's been modified successfully, but it's been added to the staging area successfully. It's ready to be committed. And then in order to do that, we're going to do git commit -m, and then we'll say, add introduction section. And then if you did a git log, you'd be able to see all that information. So when would you use the source control panel? Great question. So source control panel. Source control panel can be useful in a few different ways. Number one, I think one good use case here is, let's go back to an example where you might have a lot of changes to a lot of different files. If you're working within a large code base, I pray for you, but if you're working within a monolithic code base and there's a lot of different code and functionalities and things, and you're deep down that rabbit hole and you've made a lot of different changes, you're going to be able to see all those changes that you saved over time throughout that experimentation or innovation, whatever word you might want to use. Let's say you want to get to that point where you want to start making some commits and start organizing a lot of those changes that you made. What you can do is that on a per file basis, you can add those. So like if I had multiple files right here, let me go in here and just make another change real quick. Let's just say quick change. Save it. So you can see that when I made that change, README kind of popped into here. And I'm using commands over here to kind of facilitate the Git components of it. But what I could do the same thing by coming over to the source control panel and clicking add. Right now, if I do a git status, you're going to see that it's been modified, but it hasn't been staged for commit. If I come over here and I click add, you can see that it's now a part of stage changes. And if I do that same command, you'll see that it's been modified and that it's ready to be committed. So this is kind of more of like a user experience slash interface, declarative way of kind of performing what we did over here in the command line. Because then if I wanted to move forward with doing that commit just as much, I could say, I'll just use the same message, quick change, and then I can commit. And then next session, we're going to talk about a little bit more about publish branch. You're seeing publish branch right here. If you wanted to publish that, you could actually publish that to GitHub. I think this would kick off that process. Git was invented by the same guy who invented Linux. It's good fact. Thank you for sharing. It only took him a few days. I'm sure he was a brilliant individual. We thank him. It's a great tool. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up today? When can you do an event just about your responsibilities as a junior software engineer? Stephanie, if you want to take that one or field it, I would be happy to do follow-up events if people find this to be useful. I would need to coordinate that with Codecademy. So that's why I called Stephanie there. But I think that would be cool. That would be interesting. I'd be happy to do that. Um, does Codecademy offer a similar workshop for learning VS Code? They may. Um, I'm not sure what other live events we might have, but there might. I'm not sure. Check the catalog. If you go to the Codecademy catalog, there might be some stuff on VS Code, or maybe search for IDE. Um, I will throw it out there as well. If you guys aren't already kind of experimenting a little bit with some AI tools, maybe give those a shot. I can say that using AI can sometimes be a really beneficial tool when you're trying to learn something new. Um, just be specific with your prompts. Tell it where you're at with your journey, what you are. Be careful with the information you share, of course. But ask it questions around, here's where I am in my journey. I'm really trying to understand more about this. Can you help me understand more about this? Ask questions, read its responses, ask some follow-up questions. It's also able to quiz you, right? Hey, we've covered a topic. Can you ask me some questions about what we've covered just to make sure that, I understand it as well. That's actually kind of a component of why I do some of the volunteer work that I do. It gives me an opportunity to validate the things that I'm learning, right? Part of learning is being able to help teach others. That's something I enjoy doing. So, this is mutual beneficial. How long does it take to get a junior software engineering job? So my use case is a little we can have another session on that. My use case is a little not use case, but my situation is a little unique. I've been working for the same company. I work for Wex Incorporated. I've been working for them for a little over 6 years, almost 7 years now. I have I've been I've been in my career for about 12, 13 years now. I've been working for other organizations as well, not just Wex. But I have a lot of experience just throughout Agile, Lean, manufacturing processes. But then I kind of joined Wex and learned a lot more about development teams. Started learning more about the cloud and started getting more interested in technology. And there's just so much opportunity there for me to learn more. And so, throughout the years, I've been a business analyst. I've been a Scrum Master. As I mentioned earlier, I did some cloud FinOps analyst work for cloud cost management. I've gotten involved and interested in a lot of different things. And as a Scrum Master, I worked with multiple different development teams, and took an interest in the things that they did and the work that they did, because at the end of the day, it was difficult for me to make improvements for them if I didn't have that level of insight. And so, just over time, building my knowledge, using tools like Codecademy for sure, building that domain knowledge just with different languages and stuff, it definitely takes time, but the more consistent that you are with it, the more that you just show up and apply yourself, like it definitely can happen. Build projects, experiment. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake that you make is going to lead to a better outcome. It gets you closer to the right choice, right? So But yeah, I'd happy to have another session on something more focused.